Welcome to BNEWS Special Report. I'm Phil Gallagher, along with my guest today, Patrick Lawlor, the Assistant Town Administrator, the new Assistant Town Administrator of Burlington. Welcome, Patrick.
That's right. Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, well, let's, since it's an introduction here at BCAT, so let's start from the very beginning. I don't want to start at elementary school, but let's start, where did you go to college?
I went to undergrad at Merrimack College. I ran cross country and track at Merrimack and met my wife there. And then for graduate school, I went to UMass Boston. I got my MPA from UMass Boston.
And that's Mass Public Administration?
Master's in Public Administration, correct.
Yeah, Master's.
Yep.
And what was your undergraduate in?
Undergraduate was actually criminology. I initially thought I wanted to go into law enforcement, and I was an intern at the State House. I worked for the state, and I thought I could be probably better off in the policy side and the administration side, and I can do like 1.5 push-ups, and the idea of having to go to a police academy and have someone tell me to do more than that became really unattractive.
So that was quite a leap from from criminal justice to public administration. So how did you arrive at that, other than the fact that you could only do 1.5
Sure.
push-ups?
So when I worked for the state, I worked for the Division of Insurance, which sounds like a really boring bureaucratic state agency, but we were in charge of regulating the insurance market in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my jobs there was to, when there was a natural disaster, when there was some sort of weather event or man-made event or terrorism event, unfortunately during the Boston Marathon,
Mm-hmm.
it was our job to go out there and make sure that residents, businesses, anybody that was impacted by those events, they had access to their insurance coverage. They knew what they were eligible for. They knew everything that they needed to know, or we had to issue special regulations around that particular event. And in many of those, I got to work with our municipal partners, and I then realized this is where I want to be. I want to be sort of on the front line of government. I knew I wanted to work in government, but it took me until working with those municipal partners that reminded me or enlightened me to the fact that I want to be working on the front line and being there closest to the people as possible.
Did you butt some heads with insurance companies or with some actuaries?
Oh yeah, no, that was the fun part too. Sometimes insurance companies don't like to hear that special circumstances are going to occur or that rates are going to be regulated. But I learned a lot about government and surprisingly the insurance industry and that. So it was a good.
Were you involved in rate setting as well? Because I know they love to take in the premiums, but they're not crazy about distributing the settlements.
Right. No. Yeah. We played a pretty big role during that time with rate setting for health insurance. So that was a round of health insurance reform was there,
Mm-hmm.
And there was limits to the sort of healthcare costs at that point. So rate setting was really interesting, and sort of the process to do that, from an actuary's point of view, from a political point of view, and then sort of the other piece of the consumer protection side of things. So yeah, it was a bureaucracy in some cases, but it was a necessary
With a lot of complexities.
With a lot of complexities and something that impacts everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So who in your life were some of the mentors or people that had a direct influence on your decision making?
Sure. Well, I sort of always knew that I wanted to work in public service, and giving back is always something that my family was involved in. My dad founded the youth wrestling program in the city I grew up in Haverhill, and was always very involved in the community, and that was always just such a natural path for me. And as I saw the impact that you could make on that level, even a small level, I was always involved in sort of contributing more, whether that was, I was the class president, I was the editor of the newspaper at Merrimack, and because there was always interesting ways to get involved and try to use, those even small leadership positions as a way to sort of make things better or influence things in certain ways. And so there's many people along the way that were big impacts to me on that, and the amount of things you learn just from even small interactions with people along the way. It's not always something that you can point to that's so large, but whether you're working with someone who is on a finance committee, or whether you're working with someone on a small project that you interact with, or a contractor, or someone, there's so many of those pieces. I like to look back on my career and think, I'm always going to bring that piece with me. So there's been a number of those influences, and grateful to have so many of them along the way.
So Dad was understanding when he wanted to escape the wrestling team?
Well, so, I was the black sheep in the family, where my brothers are both high school wrestling coaches, and they were both big wrestlers in high school. One is a head coach in Los Angeles, the other is a head coach in Haverhill, both really accomplished in that field. And I was again, I didn't want to do a push-up. And it all comes back to the push-ups, Phil. But I really enjoyed running, and I did cross-country and track every year in high school, and then ran in college.
Well, you escaped cauliflower ears.
That's right,
sure.
No headgear, yeah.
So you make a leap out of the state and you go to Fitchburg.
Yes, yep. I worked for what was partly a chamber of commerce, and the other piece of it was an economic development corporation, and that was, so my job was to do two things. I was the public affairs manager there, so I worked with the communities, the cities and towns in our region. We had 28 of them that I worked with to sort of enhance the, whether it was the business community, tourism community, and sort of bring attention to a part of the state that often didn't receive a lot of attention, North Central Mass,
Sure.
Northern Worcester County. And that was another opportunity that I got of working really closely with municipal leaders and gathering a lot of those sort of tidbits along the way of, okay, yeah, this really is affirming that this is the field that, I want to be in.
Now you transitioned from there to Andover?
Yep.
And did you go directly into the assistant's job there, the assistant town administrator job? Or
No,
was it economic development?
No, so what I did in Andover, I started as what's called a management analyst, which is a common municipal term that you kind of be able to experience a lot of different things. I worked out of the town manager's office there. I worked in the budget team, so I did everything from budget development to communications to labor relations, spent a lot of time in that. And then I had a number of roles in Andover. I was the director of administrative services, and then the assistant town manager, and then
So
chief
everything the
financial
town manager didn't want to do ended up on your desk.
Exactly. There was a few of us that would joke about that all the time. But I had increasing responsibilities in different roles, but ended up chief financial officer, chief administrative officer. But I got to serve a stint as an acting town clerk, so I got to run an election. That was pretty interesting. I was glad when the election was over that night. And
no recount, I hope.
No recount. And it wasn't until the ride home I thought, oh my gosh, I hope there was no close races, 'cause I don't want to do this again. But yeah, it was a place where I got to experience a lot and was given a lot of opportunities, and was sort of tested and challenged in ways that I think will hopefully have shaped my career to this point. Yeah.
Well, we've had a tie here a long time ago, and I think we had a one vote victory. Dean French was defeated, I think, by one vote back in, I don't know, 73, somewhere in my memory banks.
You don't want to recount.
No, you don't want to recount. Fortunately here, the recounts that we have had, the Dominion system has been pretty good. I think we had one that was off by 3, and that was only because, they were outside of the margins when it was read. So why Burlington? You spent 8 years there, right?
Yeah. No, so I was really looking for the next challenge in my career, and when you work for a community like Andover that is very well resourced, a community, it's much like Burlington in many ways, and people are really engaged. People pay a lot of attention to town government. There's only so many places that I would really just consider going to work for, right? Because you want to continue with those abilities to, be your best when it comes to being a municipal manager. So when I heard that this opportunity came up, it was not something that I was expecting, for my career-wise at that time, to maybe make a move, but it was the right time, and timing became everything there, and it worked out really well.
Well, you live in Chelmsford now, so geographically it worked. You don't have to spend time on 495.
Don't have to spend Route 3's been okay to me so far this summer, but yeah, it's right down Route 3, which is nice. Yeah.
Great. Now, what are the differences between Andover town government and, well, let me go back. They haven't had any Proposition 2.5 overrides, the debt exclusions up there. They have a pretty good, healthy tax base.
So debt exclusions they've had, yeah, healthy tax base. It's not as commercially heavy as Burlington, but a really strong commercial sector. You know, no Proposition 2.5 overrides, which is rare for a community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the idea when Proposition 2.5 was enacted in the early 80s was that a community really should be having a Prop 2.5 override every decade or so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to keep up with evolving or emerging needs. So that was an interesting part about Andover, but we did have several debt exclusions, and in my time there we had a debt exclusion for an elementary school and a debt exclusion for actually what was called the pension obligation bond. We had a very, Andover, for being a well-resourced community, had a very low ratio as far as the funding level for the retirement system.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to come up with a plan that was a huge community effort to take that to take an unfunded liability of $165 million, $170 million, and resolve it through a very low interest fixed debt payment schedule.
By funding it up front?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we saved taxpayers over $150 million through that.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than pay $365 million, paying $160 million, and you know, it's
Because
interesting.
that debt would have accumulated year after year after year,
Yeah,
increasing the demands
interest
on the budget.
Exactly, and so we were really at a point where we said, well, we either need a Proposition 2.5 override, or we need to take a serious look at services.
Mm-hmm.
And like Burlington, there's a lot of creative and innovative people that wanted to solve the problem. So we spent a lot of time, 56 public meetings, you know, selling that, because it's hard to imagine going into an open town meeting where there's 1,200 people and saying, hey, could you give us $165 million to fund the pension system? You know, when I tell my colleagues that from, you know, in Massachusetts, from across the country, people usually say, you know, oh, well, you just laughed out of the room.
Yeah.
But I think, like anything, and some of the things that we're working on here in Burlington, it's all about engagement and having that right level of engagement, that stakeholder engagement, and really knowing your stuff about it. And that's what we did there. And I think that's what is so, you know, you talk about differences and similarities. What's so similar from Andover and Burlington, or any high-performing municipality, is sort of how I refer to them, is you have people in positions that really know their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a huge difference. You know, it's when it comes to municipal finance, when it comes to, you know, being able to work along someone like John Denizio, the town administrator, having somebody who is so heavily involved in finance in that role,
Mm-hmm.
Makes a huge difference for a community. And
Well, delineate for us the actual differences between the town government that you worked in there and our town government. We're in a charter review, not a charter review, but a government review committee at the moment. We haven't had a charter change, I think, since 71, where we went from open to representative town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So what differences are there that exist?
Sure. Andover has an open town meeting, so any registered voter can attend. Burlington is representative town meeting, so that's a big difference as far as that legislative body. We went through a similar government review process that started about 3 or 4 years ago in Andover and concluded. And you know, they didn't change the representative town meeting or town council. They maintained the open town meeting form of government. And then they operate on a town manager act or a charter from 1956, where here in Burlington there's many boards and committees that are elected, where there are much fewer. The only elected boards in Andover are the school committee and the select board. All the other boards, for the most part, are appointed by the town manager. So, you know, there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about what the differences between town managers and town administrators are, and there's really not a legal difference. it just depends on how your special act or special legislation sort of concentrates, official authority.
So that didn't create much friction from the various boards because the town manager appointed them.
Sure. Well, not necessarily. For the most part, no, because there was a lot of cohesive, sort of thought behind that. But think about what can be different in a 1,200 person town meeting, right? So you can be working on something for quite a long time, and then somebody who's just shown up to town meeting and has never been to a town meeting can really
Throw a
influence things.
wrench in it, yeah, sure.
So there's from like a variable perspective, I think that there's some, there becomes some similarities there.
Okay. Now, let's just talk briefly about political interference. Did you experience any of that in Andover? And how does one, or how did the town manager or yourself avoid that and deal with it?
So I think in any well-informed community, there's going to be, I don't even know if interference would be the word that I use, but there's going to be
Concern would be the
concern,
word,
interaction, and I think that yes, I think that if you don't have that, that means that I think that the community might not be as engaged as they ought to be. So I welcome those opportunities, and when there's been questions about, I love to talk about Proposition 2.5. I love to talk about the mechanics of municipal finance, and we actually would have these sort of classes, as we called them, or this academy program where it would give opportunity for residents to learn more about those things. And that's one of the ways that we, would combat sort of the negative discussions, or the discussions that are sort of misinformed or ill-informed, is go out and talk to the people about them. We caught a lot of flack from our fellow municipal managers because we spent a lot of time in those Facebook groups, engaging in those communications and saying, hey, no, that's not actually accurate. Here's some more information in it. So, a big part of what anybody can do successfully in our industry when it comes to political concern, political interference, is those conversations. Those
a lot of landmines, though, in those Facebook pages.
Oh, sure. And then, and that's usually the philosophy is, hey, stay out of them, stay out of them. But that's where people are. That's where people are having conversations. That's where people get their information. And if you're not there, I think you're missing out on it.
Well, particularly if you have an opportunity to correct inaccuracies, gross inaccuracies.
Inaccuracies, and then eventually, I think what most people find when they start to engage in that sort of methodology, and we're going to be doing a lot in Burlington when it comes to communications and improving our communications over the next, 3 to 6 months or sooner, you become a trusted resource for people.
Well, conflict eventually can produce consensus.
Yeah.
But let's, you mentioned Proposition 2.5, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts since you've spent some time, a good deal of time on it. My understanding, when Barbara Anderson had Citizens for Limited Taxation, which promoted Proposition 2.5 and ultimately got it passed, was that any state-mandated program had to be funded by the state. If a municipality was ordered to do something by the state, supposedly the state was to provide those funds. Now, we just had a situation where the PFAS, they shut our well fields down because I think we had, 30 parts per trillion of PFAS. So the well fields got shut down, and we had to spend $15 million on filters for the reservoir. Now, my understanding was that was mandated by the state. It should have been paid for by the state.
So before I get into local mandates, I think about once every 3 months something runs across my head when you mentioned Barbara Anderson and Citizens for Limited Taxation. And that was actually long before I was even born, but I spend a lot of time.
Oh, you wounded me there, Patrick.
I spend a lot of time thinking about it and how interesting it is that, a relatively small group of people, and that was a group that was around for, many years, Citizens for Limited Taxation, a lean group of organization, small group of people, they influenced municipal finance in Massachusetts in such a large way, whether you're a critic of Proposition 2.5 or whether you think that it's the best thing that's ever happened to your pocketbook or your wallet. I think it's really interesting that, that's an example of people getting together and creating something that, there's agencies in Massachusetts that are just dedicated to making sure that, that Proposition 2.5 is followed. So I think that my point being, before I really answer your question, is that it's amazing that when you're organized and when you're responsible and you can think about those things, that's like a great example of government or democracy at work. But yeah, so when you think about mandates, we have the Division of Local Mandates, which is part of the state auditor's office. And, the state does return a certain amount of money to local governments every year. Usually it's in the form of state properties that may be in that community. But I think that effort was certainly one of the philosophies there, but I think for the state to actually do that, it would almost be impossible, right? When you think about environmental concerns, when you think about changing regulatory environments, it changes so frequently that.
But wasn't it a component of the original legislation? State mandates?
I'm not sure about the legislation with that component and how much there was teeth to it. But there are a lot of programs that go along with that where the state does provide support. So like whether it's loan programs or whether it's grant programs related to those regulatory, especially when it comes to drinking water. So I mean, they may meet their obligation in that way, but whether it's dollar for dollar, it's certainly
it
not.
Wasn't $1 in
Right.
this case. But let's move on to, that was a segue. I had mentioned that to you previously. What are your responsibilities now? Are you involved in labor relations, facilities, et cetera?
Sure.
What are those direct responsibilities?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest part of my responsibilities relate to finance, budget, labor relations is a big piece of it. Union, working with our employee groups, and sort of assisting the town administrator with really anything that comes up. I'm sort of someone that I have deep municipal finance background, so I spend a lot of my time working with the budget team here and the accounting office, and I've also spent a lot of time working on human resources related matters, labor relations. So I'm open to, I really work on a number of things.
Anything that gets tossed on your desk from John's desk.
That's right, and sometimes I have to take things from him, because he was in my position beforehand. So it's a really unique and interesting dynamic that we have.
So are we involved in negotiations now? I think we have 3 contracts that are all in place, right?
Yeah, we've settled with most of our union organizations, and we're still working on
the command officers.
3 of them are public safety unions. But so far, that's another area where relationships really matter, and we have a really strong relationship with those unions, and they have union members to represent. We have taxpayers and a board to represent. So I really look at those opportunities not as opportunities to have conflict or opportunities to disappoint people by not being able to give them exactly what they want to see in their paycheck, but an opportunity to be creative, build trust. Those relationships matter outside of those, or outside of the negotiating room, way more. So I think that developing that recognition, we're lucky here that we have great relationships already built, and I'm just happy to be sort of part of that team.
Was Andover an MBTA community?
Yes.
Okay, and how did they solve that? Where did they put the 50 acres? In undevelopable places or undesirable places, or what have you?
No, so when it comes to like land use, I'm talking out of my station a little bit, but they had 3 sites. One was sort of in more of an industrial area or commercial area, where I think maybe a suitable place for it, because that corridor is certainly looking for more housing in that part. But no, it was a pretty well thought. We had a group that worked on it, sort of in coordination with the planning department. So that was one that you see these communities that are sort of getting torn apart by that. Right. But that was one that an enormous amount of engagement, stakeholder engagement, and there was really no questions at town meeting about it, which was, everybody was kind of like, okay, is this happening? Is the vote passed? But So I think that's a good example of how important that engagement process is.
Well, since the development of Route 128, Burlington has had an insatiable desire for development. And along comes this MBTA thing where they selected several places, which were probably, which were appropriate places. But the requirement was 20 units per acre. And now we have a project that's coming in September, apparently is going to be 66 units an acre. So how do we equate this overall desire for a high-density development, both commercially and residentially, when we can't water our flowers? We're already in a complete water ban. They've shut down our wells. The MWRA connection is not fully implemented, but now we're under the MWRA rules. Whenever they decide there's going to be a complete water ban, we have one. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, and I think that it's exciting that that there are people that want to live, develop, and grow in Burlington. I think that it's interesting that there are many communities that are envious of that type of development, whether it's 20 units
and that tax rate, yeah,
20 units, 40 units, and 60. Exactly, the tax rate here, or the average tax bill rather, is supported by all that great development. And water is a really complicated thing. The state recently changed legislation that if the state enters a water ban in that region, everybody has to. It's a little different than what we have going on here in Burlington, but everybody has to enter it. So there are going to be communities that are not used to having water bans that are going to start having water bans more frequently. And I think that, it's hard to influence those sort of behavioral changes, right? Like if you're someone like me who really likes your grass to be green,
And somebody like me who's got $1,000 worth of flowers and bushes,
exactly,
and green grass, none of which is going to be lasting much longer.
And I think that we all have to think a little bit. We can think better as homeowners or gardeners or people that really like how their outside of their house looks like. How can we do that more strategically and sort of think about those behaviors? An enormous amount can change if a lot of us are just sort of pitching in a little bit. And I think that that's what all of this comes back to, is sort of whether it's the amount of trash you throw out, whether it's how much watering you use, it's those sort of behavioral elements that we can't necessarily change with a flip of a switch, but really thinking about things from a community perspective that way. But like anything, there's this chicken and the egg type argument you could have, that as development grows and as housing grows or potentially grows and development grows, so does the need for capacity of water or the capacity of sewer, and what companies might come in and pay for additional pumping stations
and electricity,
or water
by
stations.
the way, too, if you've seen our electric bills.
Right, and that's an issue that people are facing. The country is dealing with that, but I think that those are exciting developments, and exciting when companies want to invest anywhere. And I think that it's a challenging issue, but it's exciting.
Did we miss anything? Is there anything you'd like to conclude with that?
No, this is
make a point.
This is great. It's a great studio. Great to be here. I'm very passionate about our relationship with the public education and government access community television. I spent a lot of time working on that in my previous roles, but this is great. I've been very welcomed in Burlington. When you start a new job, there's always that I'm sort of getting to figure out breaking in territory. It took about 3 days here, so everybody's been really great. The employees of the town are excellent. It's been a really great experience so far, and I'm looking forward to a long tenure here.
Well, anytime you're interested or you have something you want to talk about here, there's any number of us that of the volunteers that would be glad to engage you in.
Great.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank our guest, Burlington's new Assistant Town Administrator, Patrick Lawlor. Patrick, thank you again.
Thank you, Phil. Good to be here.